If Canva had tried to build a better Photoshop, it probably would have lost. Adobe had decades of experience, professional users, and some of the most powerful creative software in the world. So Canva chose a different fight. It built for people who did not call themselves designers. People who needed a presentation before lunch, a social post before the meeting, a flyer without a 6-week learning curve. That decision created a company valued at roughly $42 billion. And now, after building an audience of hundreds of millions, Canva is moving toward the professional market Adobe thought it owned. The obvious question is whether Canva can beat Adobe. The better question is why Adobe did not see this market becoming so large. To understand the blind spot, start with the fortress. Adobe did not become dominant by accident. Photoshop, Illustrator, Premiere Pro, and Acrobat became standards because they solved difficult problems for demanding users. The tools grew deeper. The file formats became embedded in workflows. Agencies trained teams around them. Schools taught them. Clients expected them. By the end of fiscal 2025, Adobe's digital media business had $19.2 billion in annual recurring revenue. In the second quarter of 2026, Adobe reported a record $6.62 billion in total quarterly revenue. This is not the profile of a dying company. It is the profile of an incumbent whose success sharpened its focus. Adobe learned to serve professionals better and charge for increasingly powerful software. But every fortress has a wall. The wall tells you what the company protects. It also tells you who remains outside. Canva began far outside that wall. In 2007, Melanie Perkins and Cliff Aubrett started Fusion Books, an online tool for creating school yearbooks. The choice sounds small because it was small. That was the advantage. A yearbook forces dozens of people to collect photos, arrange pages, keep styles consistent, and finish before a deadline. Traditional design software could do the layout, but it did not make the whole process easy for teachers and students. Fusion Books treated design as a shared workflow rather than a specialist craft. Perkins later described the logic clearly: prove the idea in a narrow market, then expand. The founders were learning something bigger than yearbooks. Most people did not want more creative power. They wanted fewer reasons to get stuck. They did not need infinite control. They needed a starting point and the confidence to finish. That insight became Canva's wedge into a market Adobe barely considered a market at all. When Canva launched broadly, its product encoded that lesson. The blank page was replaced by templates. Complicated file setup became a browser link. Searching for assets happened inside the same workspace. Dragging replaced many commands. Sharing replaced exporting and emailing endless versions. These choices looked like simplification, but strategically they did something more important. They moved the purchase decision away from the design department. A small business owner could start without asking permission. A teacher could make a worksheet without a software course. A marketing manager could edit a campaign without waiting for an agency. Canva reduced the cost of the task, but it also reduced the social cost of trying. The user no longer needed to earn the identity of designer before making something that looked acceptable. That is why comparing early Canva with Photoshop misses the point. Photoshop optimized the professional's ceiling. Canva raised the beginner's floor. Those sound like nearby goals. They create very different markets. Ease of use explains adoption. It does not fully explain scale. Canva also built a distribution loop into the product. A template gives a new user an instant result. That result gets shared with a colleague. The colleague opens the design in a browser and becomes the next user. Every team project becomes a demonstration. Every school assignment becomes a lesson. Every public template reduces the work required for the next person. Adobe's classic products spread through professional standards and file compatibility. Canva spread through participation. This matters because the person receiving a Canva link does not need the same training as the person who created it. The network can grow across skill levels. Growth also expands the template library, which increases the chance that a new user finds a relevant starting point. Better starting points improve first results. Better results create more sharing. The product and its distribution reinforce each other. Canva was not only making design software easier, it was turning finished design work into an invitation. By 2025, the scale was difficult to dismiss. Canva reported 260 million monthly users and $3.5 billion in annual revenue. It said its products were used by 95% of the Fortune 500. These numbers do not mean Canva replaced Adobe inside every professional workflow. They show something more strategically important. Canva made visual communication common infrastructure. Sales teams use it. Human resources teams use it. Founders use it before they can afford a design department. The total market expands because more work becomes design work when the barrier falls. A presentation, a social post, a proposal, and an internal update all become part of the creative economy. Adobe built extraordinary tools for people whose job was creation. Canva made creation part of almost everyone else's job. At 260 million monthly users, the group outside Adobe's traditional fortress is no longer a fringe. It is the larger territory on the map. Adobe did respond. Adobe Express brought templates, quick actions, shared assets, and simpler creation to business professionals and consumers. Adobe's own positioning makes the target clear: help people create fast while connecting them to Adobe's broader ecosystem. The response is rational. Adobe has a huge brand, a deep asset library, and relationships with professional creators. But a response from inside the fortress carries constraints. Adobe must make the entry path easier without weakening the value of its premium suite. It must welcome non-designers while keeping professionals convinced that depth deserves a subscription. It must connect a simpler workflow to a product family built through decades of specialist software. Canva began with the opposite architecture. Simplicity was the core product. Collaboration was native. The wider organization was the first market, not an extension. Adobe can copy a feature. Rebuilding the assumptions around the feature is harder. The battle is shaped by where each company began. The tension goes beyond product design. Adobe's economics were built around high-value subscriptions to deep professional tools. That model funds research and supports an enormous software portfolio. It also defines what a valuable customer looks like. A casual creator who needs one graphic this month is less attractive than a professional who relies on the suite every day. Canva could aggregate those casual jobs across millions of people because its workflow was designed for frequency across an organization. One user creates the brand kit, another updates a presentation, another turns the same material into a social post. The value moves from tool depth toward coordination. That shift changes the buyer. The budget can come from marketing operations, a school, or a small business rather than a creative professional. When the buyer changes, the competitor is no longer fighting only for software seats. It is fighting to become the place where routine visual work happens. That is a much larger surface for Canva to attack. Once Canva owned the easy starting point, it could move upward. Brand controls made templates safer for large organizations. Collaboration features pulled more teams into the same workspace. AI tools lowered the effort required to generate and adapt creative material. The platform began to look less like a single design app and more like an operating layer for visual communication. This is the classic strategic danger for an incumbent. The challenger begins with customers the incumbent does not prioritize. Its early product looks too limited for the core market. The incumbent keeps improving for its best customers. Meanwhile, the challenger gains scale, learns quickly, and adds capability. Eventually, the products overlap. By then, the challenger brings a low-friction workflow and an enormous user base into the fight. Canva calls its direction a creative operating system. The label is ambitious, but the sequence behind it is real. Start with access, expand through collaboration, then add professional depth. The last step is where the Adobe story becomes much more serious. In 2024, Canva acquired Affinity, the maker of professional design applications positioned as alternatives to Illustrator, Photoshop, and InDesign. The strategic meaning became clear after Canva relaunched Affinity for free. By its 2026 product announcements, Canva said more than 5 million creatives had adopted it. This does not instantly erase Adobe's professional advantage. Affinity still faces the hard work of matching mature workflows, industry habits, and the surrounding ecosystem. But the acquisition changes Canva's route into the market. Canva no longer has to stretch a beginner-friendly interface until it satisfies every expert. It can keep the accessible workspace while connecting it to a separate suite designed for professional control. The company now has an answer at both ends of the skill curve. That is the move Adobe cannot ignore. Canva entered below the fortress, grew around it, and bought a bridge toward the people inside. The blind spot is becoming a corridor. Artificial intelligence increases the pressure because it compresses the distance between intent and output. A user can describe an idea, generate a starting point, and adapt it without mastering every control. That favors the company already built around reducing skill barriers. Canva's 2026 AI direction emphasizes conversational creation, editable design objects, and workflows that connect content across the organization. Adobe also has formidable AI assets, including Firefly and decades of creative data, product knowledge, and professional trust. The contest will not be decided by who can generate the most impressive demo image. It will be decided by where generated work enters a real workflow. Adobe can place AI inside the tools professionals already depend on. Canva can place AI in front of people who never plan to open a professional tool. One side begins with depth. The other begins with reach. AI makes both positions stronger, then pushes them into closer contact. The Canva story becomes less useful when it turns into fan fiction. Professional creative work is full of edge cases that templates cannot solve. Color management matters. Complex typography matters. Production pipelines rely on integrations and repeatable handoffs. Years of muscle memory are expensive to replace. Adobe's suite also connects specialists across photography, illustration, video, documents, and enterprise content. Canva's reach does not automatically become professional trust. Free Affinity adoption does not guarantee long-term retention, and a broad platform can become cluttered as it adds capability for every audience. Canva must increase depth without destroying the simplicity that created its advantage. That is a hard product problem. Adobe's opportunity is equally clear. It can use AI and Express to lower the entry barrier while using its professional ecosystem to keep the high end. The result may be coexistence rather than conquest. But coexistence still changes pricing power, customer expectations, and where new users begin. Adobe has choices, but none are costless. It can make Express more independent and compete directly for the wider organization. That risks blurring the line between a lightweight entry product and the premium suite. It can bundle more aggressively, using the strength of Creative Cloud to make switching less attractive. That can protect retention while adding to subscription fatigue. It can push professional AI faster and make depth feel easier, turning complexity from a barrier into an advantage. That path depends on proving that trusted workflows matter more than low-friction access. Most likely, Adobe will pursue a mix of these moves. The strategic test is whether the company can measure the market Canva created without viewing it only through Adobe's existing categories. If it sees Canva as a cheaper design app, it will copy features. If it sees Canva as the operating layer for routine visual work, it will rethink distribution and the buyer. The diagnosis determines the response. The broader lesson reaches beyond design software. Incumbents often define a market by the customers they already serve and the performance those customers value. That definition feels objective because revenue supports it. But a challenger can redraw the boundary. It can remove scale, cost, or coordination barriers and turn non-consumption into a market. Early on, the new product looks inferior by the incumbent standards. That is why it is easy to dismiss. The challenger is optimizing for a different job. Canva did not need to win a contest over the most advanced editing tool. It needed millions of people to finish useful visual work without becoming experts. Once those people arrived, Canva could learn from their behavior, expand across teams, and move toward professional depth. The dangerous moment was not when Canva matched an Adobe feature. It was when the market outside Adobe's core became large enough to fund the move inside. By then, the blind spot had scale. Canva is worth roughly $42 billion because it found value where the old categories sought inconvenience. It turned the template into a starting point, the browser into a workspace, and sharing into distribution. Adobe still has the stronger professional fortress. Its revenue proves that. But Canva has surrounded the fortress with a larger population and built a bridge through Affinity. The next phase will decide whether Adobe can expand outward faster than Canva moves upward. Whatever happens, the decisive move has already occurred. Canva changed the question from who makes the most powerful creative software to who helps the most people create. Adobe can answer that question. It has the technology and the reach. First, it has to accept that this is the question now. If you want more stories about the hidden decision that changed a company everyone knows, subscribe. The next battle has already started.